The blue and red lights appeared without warning in Marcus Reed's rearview mirror. He checked his speed instinctively. 5 miles over. Nothing dramatic, nothing reckless. Just enough to justify a stop if someone felt like making one. Marcus eased his black sedan to the side of the road under a dim streetlight. The night air was cool, quiet, suburban silence, broken only by the idle hum of his engine. He placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed at 10 and 2, his breathing steady, controlled. Officer Daniel Hayes stepped out of his patrol car with a certain stiffness in his posture. Young, confident, the kind of confidence that often comes from a badge more than experience. His boots struck the pavement with deliberate weight as he approached. Hayes paused briefly behind the vehicle, shining his flashlight into the back seat. Nothing unusual. Clean interior. No visible threats. Still, something about the driver seemed to irritate him before a single word had been spoken. He tapped on the window. Marcus rolled it down halfway. "Good evening, officer." His tone was respectful, even calm. "License and registration," Hayes replied sharply, skipping any introduction. Marcus handed them over without hesitation. "You know why I pulled you over?" Hayes asked. "Possibly speeding, officer," Marcus said evenly. "If so, I apologize." Hayes studied him longer than necessary. The calmness didn't sit right. Most drivers explained themselves. Some argued, some panicked. This one did neither. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus paused only slightly. "Is there a problem?" I said, "Step out." There it was. The shift. The tone changed from procedural to personal. Marcus complied without resistance. He stepped out slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and visible. The streetlight cast long shadows behind him. A passing car slowed, then continued on. Hayes circled him once, like he was looking for something specific. "You seem awfully relaxed," Hayes muttered. Marcus met his eyes. "I don't believe in making simple situations complicated." The answer, though neutral, felt like defiance to Hayes. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "For speeding?" Marcus asked quietly. "For obstructing an investigation." The words came quickly, too quickly, as if preloaded. Marcus didn't argue further. The cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the still night. Hayes leaned in closer. "You people always think you're smarter than the system." Marcus said nothing. In the distance, another patrol car's headlights appeared. "Back up." Hayes walked him toward the cruiser, radio crackling as he reported suspicious behavior and non-compliance. The language sounded rehearsed. As Marcus was guided into the back seat, he glanced once at the quiet neighborhood around them. No anger in his face, no panic, just patience. And somewhere behind that steady expression, calculation. Officer Hayes believed this was routine. Marcus Reed knew it was anything but. Officer Daniel Hayes didn't like being questioned. Not directly, not indirectly, and certainly not by someone standing calmly in handcuffs behind his patrol car. Backup arrived within minutes. Officer Kevin Doyle stepped out, adjusting his vest as he approached. "What have we got?" "Obstruction. Suspicious behavior. Refused to cooperate," Hayes said quickly, like he had rehearsed it on the short walk back. Doyle glanced at Marcus, who stood silently under the streetlight, hands secured behind his back. "He doesn't look like he's causing much trouble." Hayes shot him a look. Looks can be deceiving. Marcus remained composed, his breathing slow, his posture straight. No resistance, no raised voice, just stillness. That stillness irritated Hayes more than any protest would have. "I'm going to search the vehicle," Hayes said. "For what probable cause?" Marcus asked calmly. The question landed like an insult. "See? That right there?" Hayes snapped. "You think you know the law. I believe in understanding it," Marcus replied. Doyle shifted awkwardly. The tension felt heavier than it should have for a minor stop. Hayes moved toward the sedan and began searching aggressively glove compartment, center console, under seats. The flashlight beam cut through the interior like an interrogation light. He found nothing illegal, nothing suspicious, nothing at all. But that didn't stop him. He slammed the car door shut harder than necessary. "You're being evasive," Hayes declared. "I answered every question," Marcus said evenly. "You hesitated when I told you to step out. I asked for clarification." Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't ask officers for clarification. You comply." "I did comply." The facts only fueled the ego. Hayes turned to Doyle. "Add resisting delay and possible interference." Doyle hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Write it." Marcus observed every word, every decision. He said nothing further. Hayes approached him again. "Anything illegal in the car we should know about? Weapons? Drugs?" "No, officer." Hayes leaned closer. "You're awfully confident for someone in cuffs." Marcus looked straight ahead. Confidence isn't illegal. For a split second, Hayes felt something he didn't like: uncertainty. The kind that creeps in when control doesn't feel absolute. He quickly pushed it aside. "Put him in the back," Hayes ordered. Doyle opened the cruiser door. Marcus ducked slightly and slid into the back seat without resistance. The door shut with a heavy metallic thud. Hayes stood outside for a moment, staring at the darkened window. Something about this man unsettled him. Not fear, not anger, control. Marcus wasn't begging, wasn't arguing, wasn't reacting the way most people did when they realized charges were being stacked against them. Instead, he looked like he was waiting for something Hayes couldn't see. Inside the patrol car, Marcus leaned his head slightly back against the seat. His expression remained neutral, but his mind was active, calculating timelines, procedures, policies. Officer Hayes climbed into the driver's seat and keyed the radio. "Transporting suspect for booking." The engine roared to life. As the cruiser pulled away from the quiet street, Hayes felt a strange surge of satisfaction. He believed he had asserted authority. He had no idea he had just triggered something far beyond his understanding. The patrol car rolled into the station parking lot just before midnight. Fluorescent lights flickered above the entrance, casting a harsh glow over the concrete. Officer Daniel Hayes stepped out first, adjusting his uniform as if preparing for an audience. Marcus Reed remained seated in the back, wrists cuffed, posture straight despite the uncomfortable angle. He had said nothing during the ride. Doyle opened the rear door. "Watch your head." Marcus stepped out calmly. Inside the station, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. A few officers glanced up from their desks as Hayes escorted Marcus through the lobby. "What's he in for?" one officer asked casually. "Obstruction. Suspicious conduct. Possibly resisting," Hayes replied loudly enough for others to hear. The wording was deliberate, designed to paint a picture. Marcus felt the weight of eyes on him. Judgment without context. Assumptions forming before facts. He kept his expression steady. At the booking desk, Hayes removed the cuffs briefly to fingerprint him, then re-secured them tightly. The metal bit into Marcus's wrists, but he didn't react. "You understand the charges being filed?" the desk officer asked mechanically. "I understand what's being written," Marcus replied. Hayes smirked. "He's been argumentative since the stop." "That's not accurate," Marcus said evenly. "There you go again," Hayes snapped. The exchange drew a few quiet chuckles from nearby officers. Marcus's mugshot was taken under unforgiving white light. Flash, another flash, a frozen image meant to define him as a suspect. His belongings, wallet, phone, watch, were placed into a plastic evidence bag. "You'll get these back if everything checks out," the clerk said without looking up. "If." The word lingered. Marcus was escorted toward the holding area. A metal door buzzed open. The sound echoed sharply down the corridor. Two men inside the cell looked up as he entered. One nodded slightly. The other returned to staring at the floor. Hayes lingered outside the bars for a moment. "You could have made this easy," he said quietly. "I did," Marcus replied. Hayes stepped closer. "You think staying calm makes you untouchable?" "No," Marcus said. "I think facts do." The answer hit harder than Marcus intended. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Enjoy your night." The cell door clanged shut. Footsteps faded. Inside, Marcus sat on the cold metal bench. He flexed his fingers slowly, restoring circulation. Around him, muffled station noise continued, phones ringing, distant laughter, paperwork shuffling. Humiliation is designed to break people. The public arrest, the booking photo, the holding cell. Each step meant to strip away dignity. But Marcus wasn't thinking about humiliation. He was thinking about documentation, body cameras, dispatch logs, timeline inconsistencies, language used during arrest. He replayed every moment in his mind with precision. Outside the cell, Hayes completed his report. He typed quickly, shaping the narrative while it was fresh. Subject displayed evasive behavior, delayed compliance, appeared agitated. None of it was fully true, but it sounded believable. And believable was often enough. Hayes leaned back in his chair, satisfied. By morning, the paperwork would move forward, charges filed, court dates scheduled. Routine. Across the hall, behind steel bars, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, not in defeat, but in patience. This wasn't the end of the story. It was documentation, and documentation had power. The holding cell was colder than it needed to be. Marcus Reed sat upright on the narrow metal bench, elbows resting lightly on his knees, eyes fixed on the grey concrete floor. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed faintly, never fully silent. Time moved differently inside a cell, slower, heavier. Across from him, one of the other detainees shifted. "What did they get you for?" "Traffic stop," Marcus replied calmly. The man let out a dry laugh. "That's how it always starts." Marcus gave a small nod, but said nothing more. He wasn't focused on conversation. He was reviewing details. Officer Hayes's tone. The exact wording used during the arrest. The sequence of commands. The search of the vehicle without clear, probable cause. Every second mattered. Memory is strongest when the event is fresh, and Marcus had trained himself to observe under pressure. Outside the cell, Hayes sat at a desk finishing his incident report. The keyboard clicks were sharp, decisive. Subject appeared evasive and hesitant when instructed to exit vehicle. He paused for a moment. Hesitant. That word sounded clean, justified escalation without sounding aggressive. He continued typing. Officer feared potential threat due to suspicious demeanor. Hayes leaned back in his chair, rereading what he'd written. It painted a narrative of control and caution, a story that made him look reasonable. Doyle approached quietly. "You sure about the obstruction charge?" Hayes didn't look up. He questioned commands. "That's not exactly obstruction." Hayes finally turned toward him. "You backing him now?" Doyle raised his hands slightly. "Just saying it's thin." He delayed compliance. "That's enough." Doyle hesitated but walked away. Hayes felt irritation flare again. Why was everyone second-guessing this? It was a simple arrest, a simple report. Inside the cell, Marcus leaned back against the wall. He could hear faint fragments of conversation outside. His mind remained calm. He wasn't angry. He was measuring. The holding cell door buzzed open briefly as another officer stepped in to check on the detainees. "You'll see a judge in the morning," the officer said flatly. Marcus nodded once. Morning meant court processing, formal charges, statements under oath. That was where words began to matter. Across the hall, Hayes submitted the report into the system. The digital timestamp locked it in place. Official. For a moment, a subtle unease crept into his thoughts. Something about the suspect's composure didn't sit right. Most people argued, protested, pleaded. This man had done none of that. Instead, he had watched. Hayes shook off the thought. Calm didn't mean anything. Plenty of people try to act controlled. He grabbed his coffee, now lukewarm, and took a long sip. Routine arrest. Routine paperwork. Routine court appearance. That's all this was. Back in the cell, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to focus. He knew something Hayes didn't. Documentation doesn't just record actions. It exposes them. And in less than 12 hours, the version of events written tonight would face something far stronger than assumption. It would face verification. Morning came with fluorescent light and paperwork. Marcus Reed was escorted from the holding cell just after 8 a.m., wrists cuffed in front this time. The station was busier now, phones ringing, officers rotating shifts, clerks sorting files into neat stacks that determined people's futures. He was led into a small interview room with a metal table bolted to the floor. A public defender sat waiting, mid-40s, tired eyes, suit slightly wrinkled but professional. "Thomas Blake," the man said, extending a hand as far as the cuffs would allow. "I've reviewed the preliminary report." Marcus nodded. "And?" Blake exhaled slowly. "Obstruction of an investigation, resisting delay, suspicious conduct. It's written aggressively." "Based on?" Marcus asked. "Officer testimony. Claims you hesitated and displayed evasive behavior." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Is there body cam footage?" "There should be," Blake replied, "but it hasn't been attached yet." That didn't surprise Marcus. Blake continued. "The assistant district attorney is pushing for quick processing. They're offering a plea minor, fine, no jail time, charges reduced." "How convenient," Marcus said calmly. Blake studied him. "Most people take that deal. It avoids escalation." "I'm not most people," Marcus said evenly. Blake noticed something then. Not arrogance, not denial. Certainty. "You're sure you want to fight this?" Blake asked quietly. "Yes." Outside the room, Officer Hayes stood speaking with Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim. She held the report in her hands, flipping through pages. "You're confident in this?" she asked. "Absolutely," Hayes replied. "He was non-compliant from the start." Kim nodded slowly. "Body cam will support that." Hayes hesitated, barely noticeable. "It will show his behavior." "That's not what I asked." "It supports my report." Kim held his gaze for a moment longer, then closed the file. "Fine. We'll proceed." Hayes felt a wave of reassurance. The system was moving forward, exactly as expected. Charges formalized. Court scheduled for later that afternoon. Routine. Back inside the interview room, Blake returned from speaking with the ADA. "They're proceeding," he said. "Arraignment today." Marcus nodded once. "You seem very calm for someone facing criminal charges," Blake observed. Marcus met his eyes. "Is calmness unusual in this room?" "Yes." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Request full body cam footage. Dispatch audio. And the vehicle search documentation." Blake raised an eyebrow. "You're very specific. Details matter." Blake gave a faint smile. "They do." As Marcus was escorted back toward holding to await transport to court, he passed Hayes in the hallway. Their eyes met briefly. Hayes wore the look of a man who believed momentum was on his side. "Still think you're smarter than the system?" Hayes asked quietly. Marcus paused just long enough to respond. "I think the system works best when it's tested." Hayes frowned, unsure whether it was defiance or something else. Marcus continued walking. By noon, paperwork had transformed accusation into official charge. Digital entries, signatures, seals. On paper, Marcus Reed was now a criminal defendant. But paper only holds one version of events. And by the end of the day, That version would be challenged under oath. Officer Hayes believed this would end with a quick plea and quiet closure. Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom was smaller than most people imagined. No dramatic balconies, no roaring crowds, just polished wood benches, a raised bench for the judge, and the quiet weight of procedure. Everything inside moved according to structure. Marcus Reed stood beside his attorney, Thomas Blake, hands now free but resting calmly in front of him. He wore the same clothes from the night before, pressed, simple, deliberate. No attempt to look distressed. No attempt to look sympathetic. Across the room, Officer Daniel Hayes sat near the prosecution table in full uniform. Badge polished, posture straight, confidence restored. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim organized her files neatly before the hearing began. She glanced once at Hayes. "You're certain about your statements?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Hayes replied without hesitation. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered promptly at 1:15 p.m. The bailiff called the room to order. Case 24CR1187, State versus Marcus Reed. Marcus stepped forward slightly. The judge adjusted her glasses and scanned the file. "Mr. Reed, you are charged with obstruction of an investigation and resisting delay. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Blake answered firmly on Marcus's behalf. The judge nodded. "Proceed." ADA Kim stood first. "Your Honor, Officer Hayes initiated a lawful traffic stop. The defendant displayed evasive behavior, hesitated to comply with commands, and interfered with the officer's investigation, creating reasonable concern." Hayes remained still, eyes forward. Blake rose slowly. "Your Honor, we request the court review full-body camera footage before accepting the officer's characterization." Kim responded quickly. "The officer's sworn report outlines the events clearly." Judge Whitmore raised a hand. "The court will review all available evidence. Officer Hayes, you may testify." Hayes approached the stand with controlled steps. He took the oath confidently. "Describe what occurred," the judge instructed. Hayes cleared his throat. "I conducted a routine stop for speeding. The defendant appeared unusually nervous and evasive. When asked to step out, he delayed compliance and questioned lawful commands. Based on his demeanor, I suspected potential interference. His tone was steady, professional." Blake stood for cross-examination. "Officer Hayes, at any point did Mr. Reed refuse to exit the vehicle?" He hesitated. "That was not my question." Hayes paused slightly. "No. He exited." "Did he physically resist arrest?" "No." "Did he attempt to flee?" "No." "Did you find any contraband in his vehicle?" "No." A subtle shift passed through the courtroom. Blake continued, calm but precise. "So the obstruction charge is based solely on what you describe as hesitation." Hayes felt a flicker of heat in his chest. "On his overall demeanor." Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Demeanor alone is not obstruction, officer." Hayes maintained composure. "It contributed to reasonable suspicion." Blake requested body cam footage be played. The clerk began preparing the monitor. Marcus remained silent throughout, observing, measuring. The footage had not yet appeared on screen, but tension already had. For the first time since the arrest, Hayes felt something unfamiliar creeping beneath his confidence. Pressure, and the video hadn't even started. The courtroom was quiet now, the tension palpable. All eyes were on the screen as the clerk queued up the bodycam footage from the traffic stop. The hum of the projector and the soft clicks of the computer filled the room, cutting through the silence like a surgical instrument. Every detail mattered now. Every second could unravel the narrative Hayes had carefully constructed. Marcus Reed stood beside his attorney, Thomas Blake, hands lightly clasped in front of him. His calm composure made the room feel heavier, less like an audience, and more like observers waiting for an inevitability. Marcus's eyes were trained, scanning every movement, every gesture, ready to use it all if needed. The first few seconds of the video showed the patrol car's lights flashing across the quiet suburban street. Hayes's voice could be heard commanding Marcus to step out of the vehicle. At first glance, everything seemed procedural, routine, but as the footage continued, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. The timing of Hayes's commands didn't match what he had reported. The way he described Marcus's hesitation was exaggerated. On camera, Marcus moved deliberately calm, not resistant. Blake leaned toward the judge, pointing out timestamps. "Your Honor, you'll note the officer claimed a delay of nearly 10 seconds, but video evidence shows no more than 3 seconds passed before Mr. Reed complied." Judge Eleanor Whitmore nodded, taking in the discrepancy with a keen eye. Hayes shifted slightly in his seat, though outwardly he tried to maintain control. Inside, the first hints of doubt had begun to surface. Even small cracks were dangerous when the courtroom's attention was focused so sharply. The footage continued. Hayes could be heard muttering under his breath, a remark he did not include in his written report. Blake paused the video, replaying the segment for clarity. The words were subtle but significant. "You think you can argue with me?" A moment of personal frustration, captured on camera, contradicting Hayes's portrayal of professional calm. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected a quiet strategy. The system had started to tilt, not because of anger, not because of force, but because of methodical observation and documentation. Hayes's narrative, built on perception and assumption, was beginning to unravel. Blake stood, addressing the court. "Your Honor, the officer's statements regarding Mr. Reed's supposed evasive behavior do not align with objective evidence. Furthermore, the officer's report omits key interactions that are clearly visible here, showing Mr. Reed's full compliance at all times." The murmurs in the courtroom grew slightly louder. Officers, spectators, and even the ADA exchanged subtle glances. Hayes felt the room shrink around him. Every word he had written, every confident statement he had made, now faced undeniable contradiction. For the first time, Hayes realized that authority alone was insufficient. Confidence and ego could not substitute for fact. Every gesture, every misstatement, every small exaggeration was now subject to scrutiny. Marcus Reed remained calm, unflustered, yet every detail he had quietly stored in his mind over the past day prepared him for the next step. The cracks in the story were no longer minor. They were widening, visible to everyone. The courtroom had shifted, almost imperceptibly, from a place where Hayes commanded power to one where every claim he made could and would be questioned. The tension tightened like a coiled spring, and everyone present could sense the coming revelation that would redefine who held true authority in that room. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than before, charged with anticipation. Every eye was on the screen, on the papers, on Officer Hayes, and increasingly on Marcus Reed. The calmness of the man accused of obstruction had shifted from unusual to unnerving. Even Judge Eleanor Whitmore leaned slightly forward, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Marcus Reed's attorney, Thomas Blake, closed his notebook and turned slightly toward the judge. "Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to submit additional identification and credentials on behalf of Mr. Reed." A murmur spread across the room. Hayes frowned subtly, sensing the tension spike. "Additional identification? What kind of credentials?" He muttered under his breath, but not loudly enough for the court to hear. Blake addressed the judge. "Mr. Reed is a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was acting in a covert capacity at the time of this traffic stop. The defendant's federal authority directly impacts the handling of this case and the validity of the charges." Gasps filled the room. Spectators leaned forward. Reporters scribbled notes rapidly. Even Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim froze, glancing at Hayes with a mixture of surprise and concern. Marcus stepped forward calmly, holding a slim badge case. He opened it slowly, revealing the polished badge of a special agent, his credentials neatly displayed inside. The emblem glinted under the courtroom lights. Hayes blinked. His carefully constructed narrative faltered instantly. The man he had humiliated, cuffed, and processed as a suspect was not just compliant, he was federal authority. The officer's confidence wavered, though he attempted to maintain composure. Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing slightly. "Officer Hayes," she said formally, "are you aware of Mr. Reed's federal position at the time of this stop?" I was not," Hayes stammered. He felt the heat rise to his face. His report, his sworn statements, the hours of effort, the courtroom confidence all now faced immediate scrutiny. Blake nodded toward the judge. "Your Honor, the arrest and charges were made without knowledge of Mr. Reed's federal role. Under these circumstances, we request immediate review and reconsideration of the charges filed." Marcus did not speak loudly. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood with calm authority, badge in hand, eyes steady on Hayes. That simple display, the calm composure, the evidence of rank spoke louder than any words could. The courtroom shifted. The spectators sensed the reversal of power. The officer, who had thought himself in control, now appeared exposed, small, and vulnerable. Even the judge's demeanor reflected careful consideration. She knew the balance of authority had fundamentally changed in the room. Hayes's voice cracked slightly when he was asked about procedural knowledge of federal investigations and jurisdiction. Every answer reinforced that he had acted without understanding the implications. Marcus Reed's calm strategy had achieved what anger or protest could not. By waiting, by observing, and by preparing the evidence of his authority, he had flipped the narrative completely. The reveal was not just dramatic, it was decisive. Every element Hayes had relied on to assert control was undermined by truth, credentials, and composure. The courtroom now operated on a new axis of power, one where patience and lawful authority outweighed intimidation and ego. For Marcus, this was never about spectacle. It was about justice, accountability, and ensuring the system functioned correctly even when confronted with personal abuse of power. The murmurs in the courtroom swelled. Camera flashes captured the moment. Hayes' confidence collapsed silently. Marcus Reed remained calm, silent, and authoritative. The courtroom, the public, and the officers present understood in that instant. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Justice had arrived. The courtroom had transformed into a pressure cooker of tension. Every spectator, every officer, every staff member sensed that something unprecedented was unfolding. Marcus Reed stood beside his attorney, Thomas Blake, a model of controlled composure. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Officer Daniel Hayes, who now appeared increasingly anxious, a tension visible in the tightening of his jaw and the slight tremor in his hands. The body cam footage, previously viewed in fragmented segments, was now being scrutinized frame by frame. Blake pointed out discrepancies to Judge Eleanor Whitmore. "Your Honor, note the timing of the commands issued. The officer claimed Mr. Reed hesitated significantly, yet the footage demonstrates full compliance within 3 seconds. The reported evasiveness never occurred." Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again. The words he had so carefully prepared were now at odds with irrefutable evidence. Even Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim exchanged a glance with Hayes, a subtle acknowledgement that the narrative they had relied on was faltering. Blake continued, emphasizing other points. Furthermore, Officer Hayes' report omits critical statements made during the encounter. At one point, he mutters a personal remark under his breath, not included in the official documentation. These omissions are material. They cast doubt on the credibility of the charges filed. Marcus remained silent, hands folded calmly in front of him. He did not need to speak. The evidence spoke for itself. His restraint amplified the courtroom's awareness of the imbalance of authority. Hayes, on the other hand, fidgeted in his chair, his confidence eroding as every carefully constructed statement was systematically dismantled. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Officer Hayes, are you able to explain why these discrepancies exist between your written report and the video evidence presented?" Hayes swallowed. "Your Honor, I may have misjudged certain aspects in the moment. It was a complex situation." "Complex," Blake interjected gently. "The footage shows a calm, compliant individual. There is no evidence of obstruction or physical resistance. The report exaggerates subjective interpretation as fact." A murmur passed through the courtroom. Officers whispered quietly, reporters jotted notes rapidly, and spectators exchanged shocked glances. Hayes felt the weight of accountability pressing on him. His authority, built on assumptions and ego, was crumbling under the objective clarity of evidence. Marcus Reed stepped slightly forward, though his voice remained measured and calm. "Your Honor, I did not resist, delay, or obstruct. I complied fully at all times. My actions were recorded and documented. This evidence corroborates the truth of the events, not the fabrications in the report." The room fell silent. The stark contrast between Hayes' confident narrative and Marcus's unshakable composure, supported by factual evidence, created a palpable shift in energy. Every person present sensed the reversal. The once powerful officer was now vulnerable under scrutiny, while Marcus, previously labeled a suspect, held the moral and procedural high ground. Hayes attempted to defend himself further, but each argument seemed weaker than the last. The clarity of the video evidence, combined with Marcus's calm authority and meticulous documentation, dismantled his story piece by piece. By the end of the review, the courtroom had pivoted entirely. Hayes' credibility was in question, and the charges, once seeming irrefutable, now appeared unfounded. Marcus Reed had transformed humiliation into empowerment. The moment was complete. The evidence had turned the situation inside out, exposing abuse of authority and establishing the undeniable truth. The courtroom was no longer about procedure alone. It was about justice, accountability, and the quiet power of methodical, calm authority prevailing over unchecked ego. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum of tension, but the real storm was about to shift beyond the public eye. Marcus Reed remained composed, standing beside his attorney, Thomas Blake, his calm presence a stark contrast to the flustered officer, Daniel Hayes. The earlier revelation of Marcus's federal authority had destabilized the narrative, and now the wheels of accountability began turning. Judge Eleanor Whitmore called a brief recess to allow the attorneys and officers to review key points. Outside the courtroom, Sergeant Linda Morales of Internal Affairs was already being notified. Her office had received a detailed report of Hayes's actions, including discrepancies between his official paperwork, the body cam footage, and his testimony. Morales leaned back in her chair, scanning the documents. Her eyes narrowed as she noted the inconsistencies and the serious nature of the false statements. Officers lying under oath, embellishing details, and misrepresenting events was no small matter. This was the kind of case that could spiral, impacting not just Hayes's career but the credibility of the entire department. Back in the courtroom, Hayes fidgeted in his seat, clearly aware that the narrative had shifted dramatically. His confident posture was replaced by subtle signs of panic, tapping fingers, shifting weight, and an occasional glance at the judge. He could sense Internal Affairs scrutiny looming. Even if he survived this hearing, his actions would not go unexamined. Blake approached the bench with additional documentation. "Your Honor, we request that all procedural records, including dispatch logs and vehicle search reports, be forwarded to Internal Affairs for review. There are serious discrepancies that require immediate oversight." The judge nodded. "So ordered. Officer Morales, I trust your office will handle this appropriately." Morales entered the courtroom shortly thereafter, her expression professional yet stern. She made no gestures, spoke no words, but her presence conveyed the weight of impending investigation. Hayes could feel the gravity of the situation without a single instruction being spoken. Outside the public gallery, whispers circulated among the other officers. Some were sympathetic to Hayes, others were wary of what would unfold. No one doubted that Internal Affairs had the authority and procedural backing to act decisively. The department could not ignore these contradictions. The integrity of law enforcement demanded accountability. Marcus remained observant throughout. His eyes didn't wander. His posture remained relaxed. He knew Internal Affairs was now a key part of the equation. The officer who had attempted to manipulate the system would face scrutiny beyond the immediate courtroom. He had played his role perfectly calm, composed, and prepared. Inside her office later that afternoon, Morales initiated the formal investigation. Statements were requested, timelines cross-checked, and all available evidence catalogued. Hayes's report, now clearly contradicted by both video and federal authority, would be dissected in minute detail. Every decision, every word, every gesture recorded during the arrest and subsequent booking would be evaluated. By the time court reconvened, Hayes' demeanor had shifted completely. The confident officer had been replaced by someone cautious, aware that even small mistakes could have severe consequences. Marcus's calm had done more than expose the immediate lies. It had set in motion a chain of accountability that would ripple through the department. Internal Affairs had been triggered. The officer who believed he had total control now faced an institution built precisely to prevent abuse. And Marcus Reed, patient and deliberate, remained the quiet architect of that justice. The courtroom, once a place of humiliation for Marcus, had become the center of a broader reckoning, a reckoning that Hayes could no longer control, and one that would ensure truth and procedure prevailed. By late afternoon, the courtroom had transformed from a procedural setting into a stage for accountability. Officer Daniel Hayes sat at the prosecution table, his confident demeanor from the morning now frayed, replaced by tension that seemed to ripple through every movement. The revelation of Marcus Reed's federal status and the corroborating body cam evidence had already undermined the officer's credibility. Now, with Internal Affairs formally reviewing the case, Hayes felt the walls closing in. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim cleared her throat and addressed Judge Eleanor Whitmore. "Your Honor, in light of the inconsistencies revealed and the corroborated evidence provided by Mr. Reed, the prosecution is reconsidering the charges." Hayes swallowed hard. The words hit him like a sudden jolt. He had built his morning narrative on confidence, on procedure, on ego. Now, every carefully typed word, every spoken statement was being questioned under the scrutiny of law and fact. Marcus Reed remained silent, standing beside his attorney, calm and composed. His posture radiated quiet authority, a stark contrast to the unraveling officer. His hands were folded in front of him, movements measured. He didn't need to speak. The evidence and his presence were enough. The courtroom murmured quietly as Blake stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," Mr. Reed complied with all lawful orders. The charges filed were based on exaggeration and subjective interpretation. With the submission of full documentation and verification from dispatch logs and body cam footage, it is clear that Mr. Reed's conduct was fully compliant. Furthermore, Officer Hayes' reporting contains inaccuracies significant enough to warrant departmental review. Judge Whitmore nodded gravely. She had seen similar cases before, but few with such a dramatic reversal of perceived authority. The weight of responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders. "Officer Hayes," she said formally, "you will be subject to Internal Affairs investigation regarding the accuracy of your reporting and conduct during this incident." A subtle tremor ran through Hayes. He attempted to compose himself, adjusting his uniform, but it was clear the declaration had undermined him completely. His authority in this courtroom, once unquestioned in his mind, had collapsed under the weight of objective evidence and the methodical calm of Marcus Reed. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs Sergeant Linda Morales had begun gathering all records, statements, and video evidence to ensure a thorough review. Hayes's actions were no longer isolated. They were subject to institutional scrutiny that could affect his career, reputation, and future. The murmur among officers and spectators conveyed the silent acknowledgement that unchecked authority had consequences. Media representatives scribbled notes furiously, capturing the collapse of an officer's narrative juxtaposed with Marcus Reed's quiet command of the situation. The courtroom's energy had shifted entirely, the audience no longer focused on the charges, but on the unraveling of a misused authority and the unfolding accountability. Marcus finally allowed himself a faint nod toward Blake. The subtle gesture acknowledged the work done so far and reinforced the principle that calm, precise, and lawful conduct was more powerful than aggression or ego. Hayes slouched slightly in his seat, aware that every action, every statement, every assumption had been scrutinized and found wanting. By the end of the session, the charges had been withdrawn, the narrative rewritten in Marcus Reed's favor, and Hayes's career temporarily suspended pending investigation. Authority, Hayes realized too late, was never just about the badge. It required integrity, accuracy, and humility, qualities he had failed to uphold. Marcus Reed walked out of the courtroom quietly, leaving behind the chaos, the whispers, and the lesson. True power was earned through composure, truth, and patience, not force. The courtroom had emptied significantly by late afternoon, leaving only the key participants: Judge Eleanor Whitmore, Marcus Reed, Thomas Blake, Officer Daniel Hayes, and a few court staff. The weight of the day's events hung in the air, heavy and tangible, a reminder of the dramatic shift in authority that had taken place over the past 12 hours. Marcus stood near the defense table, calm and composed as ever. His posture reflected confidence without arrogance, dignity without showmanship. Throughout the proceedings, he had done nothing overtly dramatic. He had simply allowed the truth, documented and verified, to speak for itself. That quiet patience had dismantled assumptions, reversed public humiliation, and brought order to the chaos Hayes had attempted to create. Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses and addressed the courtroom formally. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and the discrepancies in Officer Hayes's report, the court finds no grounds for the charges filed against Mr. Marcus Reed. All allegations are hereby dismissed. A quiet murmur swept through the few spectators still present. Hayes's shoulders slumped slightly, the realization of his defeat settling heavily upon him. Internal Affairs would follow up, but for now, the courtroom had spoken decisively. The misuse of authority would not stand unchecked. Marcus's attorney, Thomas Blake, stepped forward to acknowledge the judge's ruling. "We appreciate the court's attention to detail and commitment to justice." Marcus spoke next, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, I thank the court for ensuring that truth and procedure were upheld. My intention has never been to create spectacle, but to ensure accountability and integrity in the system." Hayes avoided eye contact, the weight of embarrassment and exposure clear on his face. The badge on his chest, once a symbol of unchallenged authority, now seemed diminished by the evidence against him and the scrutiny of the courtroom. He had learned too late that authority alone was insufficient. Integrity, accuracy, and calm assessment were essential to wielding real power. Judge Whitmore added a few final words, emphasizing the importance of accountability. "Let this serve as a reminder that the justice system is built not only on authority but on honesty, diligence, and respect for due process. Officers and citizens alike must be mindful of their actions and the consequences they carry." Marcus nodded once and gathered his documents and personal items. He didn't linger. The courtroom, which had been a place of tension and uncertainty, had now become a symbol of order restored. Every step he took was deliberate, measured an embodiment of quiet authority. Outside, reporters and staff took note of the unusual sequence of events. A man arrested for seemingly minor violations had calmly and strategically revealed a larger truth, exposing misuse of power and ensuring accountability. The story would spread, not for drama, but because the principles behind it resonated with everyone who understood the importance of fairness and justice. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse, the afternoon sunlight falling across the steps, he felt no need for fanfare. There was no celebration, no triumphal gestures, just the quiet satisfaction that the truth had prevailed, that justice, when exercised patiently and correctly, required neither anger nor aggression. Officer Hayes remained seated, reflecting on the day's events. Marcus Reed's calm, methodical approach had achieved what force and intimidation never could. Authority, Hayes realized now, was not about asserting dominance, it was about integrity, preparation, and respect for the system. Marcus Reed disappeared into the city streets, his role in the federal system continuing, but the lesson left behind was clear. True power is silent, precise, and undeniable. It does not demand recognition, yet when tested, it commands respect. And today, quiet justice had spoken louder than any badge ever could.